He said his grandpa was a Terminator. So they turned him into a joke, a meme, and a walking microwave. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The school gymnasium buzzed with excitement as parents, teachers, and students filled the bleachers for Career Futures Day. A giant LED screen hung center stage, flashing the title, Dream Big, Speak Bold. Each grade had chosen one student to give a short talk about their dream job. Most had already gone up. Some wanted to be doctors, others teachers or influencers. The audience clapped politely each time, distracted by phones or chatting in hushed tones. Then, a name echoed through the sound system. Next, representing grade 7, Ethan Walker. Ethan walked onto the stage clutching a single sheet of paper, slightly crumpled at the corners. He was small for his age, wore glasses a size too big, and had a voice that still cracked when nervous. A spotlight tracked him to center stage, and for a moment, the crowd quieted. He cleared his throat. Hi, I want to be an action hero, like the ones in the movies, the kind that saves people. And I know that's possible, because my grandfather was one. He played the Terminator. The silence didn't even last 2 seconds. A loud guffaw broke from the sophomore section. Then another. Then a ripple of laughter rolled across the entire gym. One student shouted, Bro, your grandpa's a robot? That explains a lot. Another screamed, Which version? The one from the dollar store. And just like that, the wave became a tsunami. Someone near the AV booth snorted and said, Machine malfunction detected. The teachers didn't intervene. In fact, one of them smiled awkwardly. Ethan stood there frozen. He hadn't expected applause, but he certainly hadn't prepared for this. He tried to keep going. He was in Terminator 2, actually. I saw pictures, and pictures? A student shouted. Man, I got Photoshopped too. The crowd erupted. One boy cupped his hand around his mouth and did a deadpan robot voice. I'll be back after my oil change. Backstage, someone had already begun working on a meme. It didn't take long. By the time Ethan reached the edge of the stage again, his face had been edited onto a microwave oven with glowing red eyes and a caption, I'm Humiliated. The image spread like wildfire through the school's group chats, followed by a remix video of Ethan's speech auto-tuned into a robotic screech, layered over EDM beats. The gym wasn't just laughing now, they were howling. A group of 8th graders even began a slow chant, Terminator, Toiletinator. Ethan stood by the curtain, cheeks flushed, trying to disappear. His teacher bent down and whispered, Just breathe, it'll pass. But even she couldn't hide the amusement in her tone. A few feet away, the school counselor muttered to a colleague, Still on about that grandfather's story, huh? Poor kid's been saying that for years. No one's ever seen the man. They both chuckled. Maybe it's an imaginary friend with sunglasses. In the hallway after the event, students passed Ethan, making whooshing sounds, pretending to scan each other like a robot. One boy blocked his path and said, Are you going to laser me if I don't say yes, sir? Another girl giggled. Don't forget to recharge tonight. You're running low on dignity. Ethan didn't say a word. He kept walking, shoulders tucked in, eyes down, but his hands were shaking. By lunchtime, the meme had made its way to TikTok under the hashtag microwave boy. One student live streamed from the cafeteria holding a paper bag over his head with 2 red dots drawn on it. Guys, I'm Ethan's cousin. Just here to drop some firmware updates. The comments were brutal. Does he speak Wi-Fi? Bet his grandpa's Alexa in disguise. Somebody get that kid a plug. What made it worse was that no one, not a single person, stood up for him. Not one teacher asked the AV team to take the meme down. No parent complained about the cyberbullying. And the principal? He was too busy prepping for the afternoon session, where Ethan would be invited for a private chat. Back home that evening, Ethan sat in his room with the lights off. His mom knocked gently and left a sandwich by the door, but he didn't touch it. The glow of his tablet lit his face as he scrolled through the endless mockery. For a moment, his finger hovered over the icon for video call. He tapped it. The screen rang once. Then twice, then a man's face appeared. Rugged, with weathered lines, a square jaw, and soft eyes that instantly softened. "Hey, champ," the man said. "Rough day?" Ethan nodded but didn't speak. The man looked like someone out of a movie. Leather jacket, thick accent, presence that filled the screen. But he wasn't acting. "Don't let them make you doubt what you know is true," he said. "Sometimes the truth feels loneliest right before it proves itself." Ethan looked down, ashamed. "They said I'm lying, that you're fake, that I'm just a joke." The man didn't flinch. "Do I look fake to you?" Ethan smiled weakly. "No, sir." There was a pause. Then Ethan whispered, "Promise me you won't come." The man raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because if they see you, they'll just say I'm using you, that you're here to save me. I want to stand on my own." The screen was quiet. Then the man said, "All right, but if things go too far, I'll be back." The call ended. Ethan sat in silence, his heart thudding, knowing tomorrow would be worse. But something in him had shifted, not because anyone had defended him, but because one man had seen him, believed him, and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And that would have to be enough. For now. By the second day, Ethan's name wasn't just a joke. It was a punchline sharpened to cut. The meme had mutated. It wasn't just his face on machines anymore. Now it was full video edits. Clips of him speaking at the assembly stitched together with footage of toasters ejecting bread, microwaves spinning on high speed, and factory robots welding steel. One had nearly 12,000 views on TikTok before noon. The caption read, "Introducing Ethanator 3.0, programmed to cringe." He didn't speak during first period. No one did either. Not because they'd moved on, but because they were waiting for him to walk past, to exist. And when he did, they unloaded. A girl dropped her pen deliberately and muttered, "Oops," dropped it in front of the AI again. Another boy reached for his pencil and said, "Hope your sensors don't glitch if I get too close." The hallway had become a stage, and Ethan was the daily performance. When he passed by the library, someone triggered the motion sensor door and said, "Look!" It opens for its kind. Even the janitor, an older man who had always been kind, chuckled under his breath as he wiped the smudge off Ethan's locker. Better keep this one clean. Don't want the robot short-circuiting. In math class, when the teacher asked a question about exponential growth, one student raised their hand and said, "Like Ethan's lies, right?" The room broke into laughter. The teacher didn't stop it. She smiled tightly and continued the lesson, stepping over his silence like it wasn't there. Ethan kept his head down, pretending to write while his ears burned red. The paper under his pencil stayed blank. At lunch, he didn't even try to sit inside. He walked straight to the far end of the field, where the maintenance shed cast a shadow and the noise from the cafeteria couldn't reach. But they found him anyway. A drone. Someone had flown a mini drone with a phone taped to it. The screen played a loop of his face, warped and pixelated, repeating the words, "I want to be a hero." A recorded voice layered over the top said in a cold robotic tone, "Access denied." He didn't even flinch. He just sat there, knees pulled in, staring straight ahead. The drone buzzed off, leaving behind laughter that carried on the wind. The worst blow came not from his classmates, but from someone he'd trusted. Mr. Denton, his science teacher, the one who had once praised Ethan for his curiosity, now stood at the front of class holding up a worksheet and casually said, "Make sure you don't plagiarize your answers. We already have one student who thinks fiction is reality." The room went still. Then came the snickering. Mr. Denton didn't correct them. He just erased the board. Ethan's breathing got shallow. He couldn't focus. His pencil snapped under his grip, and he didn't bother picking it up. He just stared at the fragments like they weren't real. In the main hallway, the school had posted an announcement. Special assembly tomorrow. Digital responsibility and honesty in youth. Beneath it, someone had taped a sheet of paper, covered in binary code. At the bottom, it read, "Ethan will be reprogrammed live." No one tore it down. Even the principal walked past and didn't remove it. By the time the final bell rang, Ethan didn't go straight home. He walked slowly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. His phone buzzed with new tags, new videos. One showed a fake behind the scenes of Ethan getting built in a lab by evil scientists. Another showed him shutting down after someone spilled water. The cruelty was creative, merciless. When he got home, his mother called from the kitchen. "How was school, sweetheart?" He didn't answer. He walked straight to his room, shut the door quietly, and sat on the floor. His tablet screen still had yesterday's video call open in standby mode. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to see the face. He just needed to know it was still there. But after a minute, he tapped the screen. The call connected. Arnold appeared, calm as ever. No sunglasses this time. Just the eyes. The ones that saw everything. Ethan didn't speak. He just held up his tablet so Arnold could see the hallway posters, the edited videos, the comments. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Arnold looked at the screen, then leaned forward. "They're scared of the truth, Ethan. That's why they laugh. That's why they attack. Because once you show them something real, they lose control." Ethan's voice cracked. "But I'm losing everything else." Arnold paused. "No, you're holding on to the one thing that matters. Integrity. It's heavy now, but later, when it's light, you'll realize no one else was strong enough to carry it." Ethan nodded slowly. Then, almost afraid of the answer, he asked, "If it gets worse tomorrow, will you be there?" Arnold didn't blink. "I'll be there. But not as a rescue. As a reminder." Ethan looked down. "Reminder of what?" Arnold smiled, but only slightly. "That truth doesn't need an audience to be true." The call ended. Ethan sat still in the dim light of his room, then turned and pulled the red box from under his bed. He opened it again. This time, he didn't just look at the pictures. He pulled one out, the one where Arnold was kneeling beside him, sunglasses in one hand, holding Ethan like something fragile and permanent. He slid the photo into his backpack. The night passed slowly. He didn't eat dinner. He didn't speak again. But when he finally climbed into bed, he didn't pull the covers over his head like he had the night before. He left the curtain cracked. A sliver of moonlight touched the edge of his desk. He stared at it. Tomorrow was waiting. And this time he would be ready. The summons came quietly, with no announcement and no warning. During third period, a student aide stepped into Ethan's classroom, handed a folded slip to the teacher, and walked out. Mr. Connolly read the paper, then looked at Ethan like someone examining a malfunctioning appliance. Principal's office. Now! That was it. No explanation. No sympathy. Just silence. And every pair of eyes in the classroom watching Ethan as he gathered his books like he was being led to execution. The hallway felt longer than usual. Every footstep echoed. Every glance from passing students was a silent confirmation of guilt, as if he'd already been convicted of something unspeakable. When he reached the front office, the secretary barely looked up. She pressed a button and spoke into the intercom. "He's here." Then, without looking at Ethan, she added, "Second door on the left. Don't knock. He's expecting you." Ethan walked in. The principal, Mr. Caldwell, didn't rise. He sat behind a desk that looked more like a judge's bench than anything belonging in a school. On the far wall, framed quotes hung neatly. Words like integrity, respect, and excellence in bold capital letters. The irony hit like a slap. "Sit," Caldwell said, gesturing with a pen, eyes never leaving the document in front of him. Ethan obeyed. His chair creaked softly. There was a long pause, deliberate and uncomfortable. Then Caldwell finally looked up. His face was smooth, expressionless. A man trained in neutrality. "Ethan," he began slowly, "I'd like to believe that every student who walks into my office has a potential to be great. But greatness starts with honesty." Ethan didn't speak. "I've reviewed what happened during the assembly. I've seen the footage. I've read the messages. You've stirred up quite a response." Ethan sat still, not sure what he was supposed to say. Not sure if any answer wouldn't be twisted. Caldwell leaned forward. "You told the entire student body, and their parents, by the way, that your grandfather was the Terminator." Ethan's lips parted slightly. "He was in the film, Terminator 2. Caldwell smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Was he now?" He's my grandfather. I can show you. No need." Caldwell interrupted. You see, Ethan, we have a responsibility here to set examples, to prepare students for real careers, not to indulge fantasies rooted in Hollywood. It's not a fantasy, Ethan said, louder this time. I can prove it. Caldwell tilted his head like someone studying a cracked mirror. Can you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you made a very public claim, disrupted a serious school event, and have since become a distraction. Ethan's hands clenched on his knees. Some of your peers, Caldwell continued, have taken your claims and turned them into something viral. You know what that means in this day and age? Liability. I'm being asked why our school allowed a student to humiliate himself on camera and then spread misinformation. You understand the implications of that. I didn't lie, but you embarrassed this institution. Ethan opened his backpack, pulled out his tablet, and swiped quickly. A moment later, he held it up, ready to start a video call. I can show you. Right now. Caldwell looked at the screen, unimpressed. I don't need to speak to an actor. You be speaking to my grandfather. Caldwell raised a brow, then leaned back in his chair with a soft chuckle. Ethan, this isn't a Netflix special. This is a school. That kind of dramatics doesn't work here. He gestured to the screen. Put that away. Ethan hesitated, hand trembling slightly. Then he turned the screen off. Caldwell slid a paper across the desk. Tomorrow, we'll be holding a special assembly, a chance for the student body to reflect on digital integrity. We expect you to participate. You'll be issued a statement to read aloud, apologizing for any confusion your words may have caused. Ethan stared at the paper like it was written in another language. I'm not asking you to admit anything false, Caldwell said, but optics matter. Perception matters. An apology will restore balance. I'm not sorry, Ethan whispered, then pretend. The room fell quiet. I want to speak the truth, Ethan said, steady now. Caldwell tapped his pen. The truth is a luxury, Ethan. One the school can't afford if it brings chaos. So you will read the statement tomorrow, or you will face a disciplinary hearing. Is that clear? Ethan stood up, slowly. If telling the truth causes chaos, he said quietly, then maybe the school needs it. Caldwell's face hardened. Careful. Ethan didn't respond. He left the room without waiting to be dismissed. Outside the office, the hallway looked brighter somehow, sharper, louder, like the world was trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. Students passed him like ghosts, but he didn't shrink away this time. He walked straight to his locker, opened it, and pulled out the photo from his backpack, the one of him and Arnold. He stared at it for a long second, then tucked it into the front pocket of his hoodie. Tomorrow would come fast. The school wanted a stage confession, a cleanup, a reset, but Ethan had already made his choice. He wouldn't apologize for the truth. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Ethan didn't speak during breakfast. His mother watched him from across the table, sensing something was different. He wasn't angry or scared or withdrawn like before. He was calm, too calm for a 13-year-old about to be publicly shamed by his own school. She reached out to touch his hand, but he was already standing, already putting on his backpack. She didn't stop him. She just whispered, "Be careful," as he walked out the door. At school, the atmosphere was strangely quiet. Not silent, but charged like static before a storm. Students whispered in clusters. The latest rumor was that Ethan would be making a formal apology at the special assembly. Some said the district made him do it. Others joked he'd glitch out halfway through his speech and spark like a broken appliance. The screen in the front lobby flashed today's Assembly Honesty and Digital Citizenship in bold, perfect letters. Below it, a school motto, "Where truth shapes tomorrow." Ethan walked through it like it meant nothing. By second period, everyone knew what time the assembly would start, 11 sharp. Teachers subtly encouraged students to be respectful and listen closely, but no one pretended not to know who the target was. The whispers grew louder. Some even made bets on what Ethan would say. "He's totally gonna fold." Someone snickered near the lockers. "Bet'll cry." Another replied, "Or self-destruct. Either way, I'm recording." Ethan sat alone at the back of his English class, eyes fixed out the window. He wasn't reading. He wasn't doodling. Just breathing. Slow. Measured. There was a storm in his chest. But he wouldn't let it out yet. What no one noticed was a visitor pass taped to the front office door. A plain white envelope had been dropped off hours earlier. The secretary barely glanced at it. She didn't question who had left it. There was no name, no return address. Just a small embossed seal in silver at the bottom corner, a stylized S with a barbell etched behind it. Inside the envelope, a single card, present, listening. At exactly 10:55, the bell rang early, signaling the special assembly. Students flooded toward the auditorium, buzzing like a hive. Phones were tucked into sleeves and hoodies. Every kid knew this would go viral. This wasn't just school drama. This was entertainment. Ethan, the liar, the delusional machine boy, was finally going to break. As students took their seats, Ethan stood just outside the entrance to the auditorium. He looked down at the photo still in his hoodie pocket, just for a second. Then he folded it back in, zipped it shut, and walked through the double doors. The stage was already lit. A podium stood at the center, and behind it sat a projection screen flanked by banners about digital responsibility and student leadership. Principal Caldwell stood off to the side, arms folded, speaking softly to the event coordinator. When he saw Ethan, he gave a small nod, then gestured toward the front row. The room filled fast. Over 400 students. Teachers, even some parents. All of them gathered for a lesson, except it wasn't truth they were expecting. It was compliance. Ethan sat alone at the edge of the front row. The lights dimmed. The projector flicked on. Principal Caldwell stepped forward. He cleared his throat. Today's assembly is not about punishment. It's about reflection, about learning from moments that remind us how important honesty is. In our words, our actions, and our digital choices. A pause. And now, one of our students would like to share something. Ethan stood. Every phone in the room lifted. Every breath seemed to pause. He walked slowly toward the podium, heart pounding but legs steady. He placed his hands on the wood. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The apology the principal had given him. He looked at it. Then he looked out at the crowd. And he ripped it in half. Gasps. A few laughs. A wave of murmurs swelled in the room. Ethan leaned forward into the mic. I was asked to apologize, to pretend that what I said about my grandfather wasn't true, to protect the school's image. But I won't. The crowd shifted. Phones steadied. Some teachers sat upright now. My grandfather did play the Terminator. He is an actor, and he's also my family. You can laugh, but it won't change who he is, or who I am. Caldwell stepped forward. Trying to reach for the mic, Ethan turned slightly, but didn't back away. I didn't come here to convince anyone. I came here because the truth shouldn't need permission. Then the lights went out. At first, people thought it was a glitch. A few giggles. But then came the music. That unmistakable bass. A rising metallic rhythm. The theme from Terminator 2. Every head turned toward the back of the auditorium as the doors creaked open. A silhouette stepped through the doorway. Tall, broad shoulders, leather jacket, slow, deliberate steps. The room froze. Some thought it was a prank, a costume. But the closer he came, the more the air changed. Phones dropped slightly. Eyes widened. And when the man stepped into the light, no one laughed. Arnold Schwarzenegger, in the flesh. No fanfare. No introduction. Just presence. He walked past the rows of stunned students, past the shocked teachers, past Principal Caldwell, who stood speechless by the edge of the stage. He stopped next to Ethan, said nothing, just placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, and nodded. The music faded. The room didn't make a sound. Ethan looked out at them all, at the people who had mocked him, doubted him, silenced him, and he didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. For a full 10 seconds, the auditorium sat in stunned, frozen silence. Arnold Schwarzenegger, an icon whose name most had only ever said jokingly, half believing he was more myth than man, was standing beside Ethan, real, unapologetic, and silent. The moment stretched, heavy and undeniable. Phone slowly lowered, not from instruction, but from instinct. It didn't feel right to record anymore. Something bigger was happening, and no one wanted to interrupt it. Principal Caldwell stood near the edge of the stage, still trying to process what had just happened. He opened his mouth, perhaps to salvage control, but no words came. His fingers twitched toward the mic stand, but then he stopped, as if realizing how small his authority suddenly looked. Arnold didn't even glance his way. He didn't need to. His presence alone had shifted the power dynamic of the entire room. Ethan took a breath, not because he was nervous, but because he didn't want to rush to silence. It had taken 2 full days of humiliation to get here. 2 days of being laughed at, called a liar, a joke, a machine, and now they were listening. Not because he shouted, not because he fought, but because truth had walked in beside him wearing a leather jacket and a calm face. Then Ethan spoke again. You thought I made it up. You laughed. You called me names. You edited videos to make me look stupid. And I let it happen. I didn't fight back because I thought maybe if I stayed quiet it would stop. But silence doesn't protect you. It just makes it easier for them to keep swinging. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He just let the words fall like clean cuts. I never needed to prove who my grandfather was. But I needed you to know that I wasn't lying. And maybe more than that, I needed to know I could still believe in my own voice. Arnold's hand never left his shoulder. He still hadn't said a word. And somehow, that said everything. Caldwell finally stepped forward, clearing his throat into the microphone. I think we've all just witnessed something very powerful. Let's take a moment to thank our surprise guest and acknowledge Ethan's bravery. It was a kind of sentence built from desperation. Hollow, weak. A few students clapped, unsure, hesitant. But most didn't, not because they weren't impressed, but because applause felt too shallow for what had just happened. Arnold finally turned to Ethan. You did good, he said softly, then looked out the crowd. Better than I ever did at your age. He took a slow step toward the microphone. The air in the room tightened again. When I played the Terminator, he began, voice calm and steady. People thought I was just playing machine. But the truth is, it's easier to play someone with no feelings than to stand up and show you have them. He looked at the students, then at the teachers. His tone never changed. I didn't come here to defend Ethan. He didn't need defending. I came here to remind all of you what it looks like when someone tells the truth, even when it costs them everything. He pulled a small folder from his coat and handed it to Ethan. I brought this from my office. It's the original shooting script from Terminator 2, the one I kept all these years. Then, turning back to the mic, I added a note. Ethan opened the folder slowly. Inside was a page weathered and annotated. On the cover, in bold ink, a message written by hand. For Ethan, truth doesn't whisper. It stands. Grandpa Ethan's eyes didn't water, but something in his chest loosened. Something heavy. Something old. Arnold nodded once, then stepped back on the mic. He looked toward Caldwell, who stood frozen, face unreadable. Then, without another word, Arnold turned, walked off the stage, and exited the auditorium the same way he came in. No music, no spotlight, just silence and the sound of hundreds of people realizing what they'd just witnessed. The principal adjusted his tie. That concludes our assembly. You are dismissed in silence. But no one moved. Rows of students stood slowly, not because they were told, but because something inside them said it was time to stand. Not for Arnold, not even for Ethan, but for themselves. Some of the students who had laughed the loudest now couldn't meet Ethan's eyes. One girl approached him after everyone else had begun to file out. She held her phone like a shield, but her voice cracked as she spoke. I reposted that microwave thing, she whispered. I didn't think it was real. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded. He didn't shame her. He didn't need to. Forgiveness, like truth, didn't need a spotlight either. As he walked out into the hallway, his steps were lighter. He wasn't just a boy they called a liar anymore. He wasn't the meme. He wasn't the joke. He was the kid who stood up when everyone told him to sit down. And for the first time since this started, no one followed him to mock. They followed him because they had finally decided to listen. 3 days later, the school pretended like nothing had happened. The posters about digital responsibility were quietly taken down. The slideshow from the assembly never made it to the school's online portal. And Principal Caldwell, who had once proudly declared the event a community reset, hadn't mentioned again. But everyone remembered, not just the spectacle, not just the music or the silhouette, or the moment Arnold walked into the room. What lingered was the silence that followed, the silence of guilt, of realization, of respect that arrived too late. Ethan hadn't gone back to hiding. He still walked the same hallways, still carried the same backpack with a folded script inside. He didn't need to show it to anyone anymore. Its existence wasn't for them. It was for him. Proof that truth one stood in doesn't need to shout. The jokes had mostly stopped. Some kids ignored him completely. Others treated him like a walking apology. They were too embarrassed to speak aloud. A few even approached him, clumsy and awkward, with half-hearted compliments like, "That was brave," or, "Your grandpa's cool." Ethan always nodded politely. He didn't need their validation. He had already earned something better. But what surprised everyone, especially Principal Caldwell, was what came in the mail the following week. A plain brown envelope, addressed not to Ethan, but to the school itself. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick stationery with a gold embossed seal. From Arnold Schwarzenegger. Caldwell read it alone in his office. 3 times. The letter wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic, but it was piercing. Asterisk, to whom it may concern asterisk asterisk. I understand your school felt it necessary to pressure my grandson into apologizing for a truth he should never have been punished for speaking. I stood silent during the assembly not out of passivity, but out of principle, because I wanted your community to confront its own reflection without being told what to see. Asterisk asterisk, what Ethan showed was not defiance. It was dignity. And in a world where truth is often bartered for popularity, his courage is the kind of strength we need more of, not less. Asterisk asterisk, consider this letter not as a reprimand, but as a reminder that schools do not just teach subjects. They teach character. And your students are always watching how you treat the quiet ones, the strange ones, the truthful ones. Asterisk asterisk, you taught a lesson last week, but it wasn't the one you planned. Asterisk, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The letter circulated quietly among faculty. No staff meeting was called. No formal apology was issued. But subtle shifts began to happen. The hallway monitors stopped making passive jokes. Teachers started calling on Ethan again, not to test him, but to hear him. The librarian set aside a display of classic action films, and on top set a single photo, Arnold holding a fake shotgun, with a tiny boy in sunglasses riding on his shoulders. Even the student body, without knowing why, began to move differently around him. No one made fanfare. No one threw confetti. But one day, when Ethan entered the cafeteria, 3 students he'd never spoken to stood up and made space for him at their table. They didn't speak. He didn't either. But he sat. That was enough. What no one knew was that Arnold hadn't gone back to Hollywood. He hadn't flown off in a jet or disappeared into celebrity silence. He had stayed in town, quietly, privately, watching. That Friday, after school, Ethan walked out the front doors to see a black SUV parked across the street. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a familiar face beneath aviator glasses. Arnold smiled. "Get in. I brought you somewhere." No cameras, no audience, just them. They drove for 15 minutes in near silence, passing through neighborhoods and past the edge of town until they reached an old gym. The building looked almost abandoned, its brick facade faded and chipped. But Ethan recognized it immediately. Photos of it had been in the red box. It was the same place where Arnold had first trained, long before anyone knew his name. Inside, it smelled like sawdust and memory. The lights flickered gently overhead as Arnold led Ethan to the back room, where old weight benches and mirrors stood in quiet formation. "I came here when I had nothing," Arnold said. "Just a dream, and a lot of people telling me I'd never be anything but muscle." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You've got more than I did. You have clarity, integrity, and something else. Ethan looked up, restraint. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Arnold handed him a small box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was an old keychain. A tiny metal Terminator head, worn with age. It's just a trinket, Arnold said. But I carried it through everything. Auditions, rejections, success. I want you to have it now. Ethan ran his thumb across the edge of it. It was heavier than it looked. Thank you, he whispered. Arnold nodded. You did more than tell the truth, Ethan. You reminded people what it looks like when someone refuses to bend. They walked out into the sunlight. No red carpets. No flashes. Just warmth. Just legacy. And when they parted, Arnold didn't say goodbye. He just looked at his grandson and said, You stood tall when it counted. I'll always be proud. Then he turned, got in the SUV, and drove off down the long road with the windows down, leaving behind no echo, just silence, and the kind of truth that doesn't fade. The following Monday, the assembly room sat empty again. No music, no lights, no stage cues. Just rows of chairs and echoes of what had happened the week before. Students passed it without stopping now. Some still whisper when they saw Ethan, but most didn't. Not because they'd forgotten, but because they couldn't see him the same way anymore. You don't mock someone who stood taller than every adult in the room. You don't laugh at someone who didn't just speak, but stayed silent in the exact moment when silence said everything. Ethan didn't carry the script in his bag anymore. He kept it at home now, framed on his desk, beside the old keychain from Arnold and the red box with all the pictures. At school, he walked lighter. Not louder, just lighter. There was nothing to prove anymore. Not to them. Not even to himself. What mattered now wasn't recognition. It was what he chose to do next with the voice he had reclaimed. That afternoon, Principal Caldwell called him into the office again. But this time, the tone was different. He didn't speak like an administrator managing damage control. He spoke like a man trying to salvage his own dignity. I wanted to talk to you, he began, not quite looking Ethan in the eye. I've been doing some reflecting since the assembly. Ethan waited. He didn't smile. He didn't fold his arms. He just listened. I may have underestimated the importance of letting students express themselves honestly, Caldwell continued. And I realize now that asking you to apologize for something real was misguided. Ethan nodded once. That was all. Caldwell cleared his throat. The superintendent has recommended we invite someone to speak at our upcoming district-wide student leadership summit. Your name came up. I'd like you to consider it. Ethan blinked. Not because of your family, Caldwell added quickly, but because of what you did, how you carried yourself. I think there's something other students could learn from that. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he said, I'll think about it. And he meant it. Later that week, in the cafeteria, something happened that no one expected. A senior, one of the louder kids in the chant, the one who had posted the microwave boy edit, walked over to Ethan's table, tray in hand, and paused. He didn't have a speech. No dramatic apology. Just a single quiet question. Mind if I sit? Ethan gestured to the seat. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. It wasn't about friendship. It was about something harder to earn. Respect. That night, Ethan sat at home scrolling through his messages when he saw one he hadn't opened. It was from a student at another school. Someone he didn't know. Just a name. And a few lines. Asterisk, saw your story. I got called a liar last year, too. For something I didn't make up. Thought I was alone. Not anymore. Thank you. Asterisk, Ethan didn't reply. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't a response. It's space to feel seen. The next morning, as he stepped onto campus, he saw a small group of younger students gathered around a bench. One of them wore a backpack with a Terminator keychain on it. Another was sketching something in a notebook. As Ethan passed, he noticed what the drawing was. It was him, standing in front of a crowd, not with his head down, but standing. He didn't interrupt. He just kept walking. But something in his chest expanded. Not pride, Not ego. Peace. At the end of the school year, when the yearbooks came out, there was a full-page spread about the assembly. No titles, no captions, just a single photo. Ethan, standing at the podium, eyes calm, a ripped piece of paper in one hand, and the shadow of his grandfather just behind him. The light in the photo caught a moment most people would never forget, but it didn't need explanation. It just was. Underneath, in small print, were 6 words. Truth stands, even when you don't. Ethan closed the book and smiled, not for the attention, but for the journey. He had walked through ridicule, rejection, and silence, and come out still standing. That's what made him stronger than any machine, stronger than any meme, not because he had famous blood, but because he never let the world rewrite what he already knew. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to hold it still.